something else that you're not experienced with, you may have a hard time getting used to the program and things like that. So I recommend you follow along and set up the environment just like I do. So the second the second section is the introduction to CSS. Now, unlike the first section, this is going to be looking at introducing the actual CSS language. We're going to be looking at some theory behind it, where it's used, and what kind of a difference it makes. We're also going to be looking at creating and linking our own CSS document to our page. So the third section is going to be looking at our first real part of CSS. So these are the selectors and properties. Now again, you don't need to know any of these terms. I'm just going over like a kind of a spitball kind of effect here, just trying to skim over everything. So here we're going to learn about a very important concept, which are selectors and properties, and how they really play into CSS. We're also going to be learning about the different types of selectors and where to use each one depending on the situation. So you're going to learn that as well. Next section is where we start using the real power of CSS. So we're going to start using colors, and we're going to be applying those colors to our page. So we're going to be learning about different color types, how a little bit of how colors are set up on the computer. So things like RGB, other color codes, and then we're going to use them and apply them using CSS to backgrounds and text and all sorts of other things. The next section is going to be looking mainly at text. So we're going to be looking at trying to change the feel, style, and look of text. So we're going to be changing the fonts, the size. We're also going to be changing the bolding. There are so many different things that you can do in this section, and we're going to cover all of them then. So the next section is where we kind of take a turn from looking at styling and looking now at layout. So we're going to be learning some more fundamental CSS concepts related to layout. We'll talk about those when we get to it. Then we're going to be applying them to actually change the style or the layout of our page. So we're going to be moving items around. We're going to resize them and do all sorts of things with them once we get to that point. The next section we're going to look at is called Flexbox. Now, I'm sure you've heard of this if you've looked into any web development, but pretty much it's an alternate way to mess around with the layout in CSS. And it is quite new, but it is a pretty commonly used concept today, especially for responsive layouts, making websites that can work on all devices. So it's a pretty important concept there. So we're going to focus on the theory behind Flexbox first, talking about how it works, how it's set up. And then we're also going to be applying it to real life, talking about, where it can be used, some of the benefits, and then actually using it in our own project by creating our own Flexbox and messing around with it. So we're going to do that as well. So the next section is pretty similar to section 7. It's going to be looking at another alternative to using normal layout features in CSS. It's called grid, and there are a lot of similarities, but we're also going to be talking about the differences. So along with going over a comprehensive overview of kind of how grid works, we're also going to be going over some of the similarities and differences, kind of comparing it to Flexbox, and then we're going to talk about, which one you should use in each individual situation. So the next section is probably one of my favorites because it really puts all of the older kind of websites from the new sites and separates them, the modern sites from the old sites, and we're going to be looking at animations and transitions. So first we're going to look at transitions and how to use pseudo selectors. Again, don't worry about that, what it means, to create these nice smooth transitions. And then we're also going to be learning how to manipulate them. So kind of change how a transition looks. We're also going to learn how to create, apply, and manipulate our own animations. So we create these animations from scratch using CSS, and then we can kind of change them and change how they look based on what we want. So the last section is a really interesting section which kind of summarizes everything and tests your skills. So it starts with a 30-question final exam, which is a bunch of questions from every single section or topic that we've covered, and it is a final exam, so there is like a passing grade and everything like that. But again, if you fail, there's no real consequences to it. It's just kind of a diagnostic tool to test where you are in your CSS knowledge. And after that, it's followed by a really nice challenge, which can help you, really see where you're at, not from a theoretical standpoint, but from an actual practical standpoint. So this challenge is going to be talked about later once you get to that point, but pretty much you're going to